I can ask the members to sign it and any apologies. Normal, and can I also welcome anybody who's watching this via the webcast. Can I do the normal thing and ask anybody that's got a mobile phone on them if you can turn them off, please? And the other thing I need to read out is that we welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I have had no request for people to speak Welsh today, so the meeting will be conducted in English only. Declarations of interest. We haven't got anybody from legal here, but I think the normal rules apply. If you do have anything during the meeting that you think you do have a declaration of interest, can you please announce it? Because of the webcast, and I think we all know each other by sight, but I think it's be prudent if we just have a quick whiz round the table to introduce ourselves. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Councillor Raymond Mills. I chair the Healthier Communities Scrutiny Committee, and I've been asked, in inverted commas, to chair this meeting this morning. So on my right,
Councillor Owen, I chair the...
I'm Jonathan West. I work for the an Iron Bevan Gwent local public health team.
Good morning, my name is Lyndon Puddy. I'm Head of Public Services Support Unit in Torfaen. I have the lead on this.
Good morning, I'm Andy Wilson. I'm the Data Research and Participation Manager working in Lyndon's team in PSSU.
Good morning, I'm Sue Brown. I'm Policy and Partnerships Manager and work to Lyndon in PSSU.
Good morning, I'm Rachel O'Shaughnessy and I'm the Council Sustainability Manager.
Good morning, I'm Stuart Ashley. I'm Chair of Resources ONS Committee and also Sustainability Champion. Where I have to put that one in as well.
Tom Roberts, Scrutiny Support Officer.
Thanks, everybody. The way I'd like to do this, as long as everybody is happy, I'll ask Lyndon to give us a quick overview of how we've got here. Then we've got some questions. We've got some general questions, and we've got some questions particular for different scrutiny committees. So I'll ask that particular person who chairs that meeting to lead on those questions. So Lyndon, if I can ask you just to give us a brief overview.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. Just firstly, welcome the opportunity to come to scrutiny today to receive views from what has been a huge piece of work undertaken by colleagues right across the partnership, but in particular a number of colleagues sat around this table today that's pulled a huge amount of this detail together. This wellbeing assessment that you have in front of you at the moment is a draft. It's currently out for public consultation, and it went out on the 4th of January. It's a very large document made up of a number of parts, which includes an executive summary overview, the full assessment draft, and then a number of appendices that look at well-being within the three principal communities of Blaenavon, Pontypool and Cwmbran. The assessment has taken a place-based approach because we understand that not all communities across Torfaen are the same. So in order to concentrate on those three areas of activity, a report was taken to the Public Service Board earlier in 2015 to ascertain their preference of whether we take a place-based approach or take another approach based around the ways of working within the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So I apologise in advance that the documents have been very large, but they're large for a reason, because of the quantity and complexity of the work that has gone into it from all our partners across the piece. But it is very much an evaluative process, it's an iterative process, and it will continue driving towards a report that goes to the PSB in March, which will outline what the wellbeing objectives of the Torfaen Public Service Board will be, taking it through 2017 to what will be a wellbeing plan in 2018. This part of the work is split into a number of different areas. The first part of this is looking at the wellbeing assessment from what needs to be in the plan. The next stage will be an in-depth actions around what the wellbeing objectives are identified, and they will have a much greater emphasis on the detail going back into the report. So this is more of a situation analysis at this stage, so we find out what the situation is across the borough. The next part would be an in-depth analysis of the activity, which would involve a number of my colleagues across the table. As said, there's been a huge amount of work that's already gone into this. We accept the fact that there's likely to be a number of gaps that we try to identify to this, but there'll be a number of gaps that are come through the different processes that we're taking through consultation, but also receiving the views from scrutiny. The public consultation is due back at the end of February, so we will then pull that documentation together, lead into a final report in March. I think I'll leave it at that point, Chair, and open it up to scrutiny.
Thanks so much. I'll ask the first general question then. The assessment should refer to the national indicators. It doesn't appear to do so. And if you do include this, should it be laid down as an annex?
What do you mean by the national indicators?
Sorry, John.
Sorry, under the statutory guidance, it states that the assessment of local wellbeing must refer to any national indicators published under Section 10 of the Act. Now, we looked at those indicators. I can't remember the exact name of the document. It's how do you measure a nation's progress? I think something along those lines. Now, we can see that a number of the indicators are referenced, but we're not sure that they're all included within the document, and we wondered whether maybe it would be easier if they were included as a distinct annex.
The development of the initial assessment has taken. There's a number of requirements, both from the Welsh, we slipped into a different commissioner's brief then, to the what's required within the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, but also required from the Commissioner's Office down in Cardiff. And this assessment has included all the statutory requirements we've needed to put into those documentations. I can't relate entirely to the detail that you're referring to there, Tom, but as part of the process and the work that my colleagues has gone through, we've included all the statutory requirements we've needed to include.
Is it in this document?
Yeah.
I think probably just picking up as one of the officers involved, I think there were so many things that you probably realise that we had to refer to. I think all we can say at this point is that we will go back, look at the guidance, and in the next iterative process we'll take account of anything that we haven't included at this point. I don't think it's a purposeful oversight. I think it's just one of those things that we will go back and double check. And maybe it's in there and it's just that we haven't put the wording in, or we need to put a section.
Just to put some... Sorry, Rachel.
I was just going to say that national set of indicators, as Tom said, were to measure a nation's progress. So rather than individual organisations using them, it's sort of for the Welsh Government to kind of use to show that we're making progress against the Act. So we had a common data set that was put together for us to use, and we've referred quite heavily to that. And that's kind of taken into account all of the statutory requirements.
It was literally, thankfully, just to pick up a little bit of what Rachel was mentioning, Chair.
Comparisons throughout the assessment have largely been made against Wales. Do you think we should have gone further afield? Comparisons have been made against Wales. Should we have gone further afield, or do you think to compare?
I think, in essence, a lot of the comparisons that we're making are based around the region of Wales. There's a lot of differences going on within England, and we made that decision. To try and keep it as clean as possible, there was some discussion around making comparisons to Gwent. But again, you've got quite disparity within Gwent in itself, and it does fit towards the Health Board footprint and the police footprint. But for our purposes, we wanted to make it, because it was about Torfaen, it was the next natural geographical shape up, and a lot of the data that we have maybe is not available at a GB or UK level anyway. So
a rather dry comparison might be Cwmbran, because Cwmbran is somewhat unusual in being the only new town in Wales, although you could argue bits of Cardiff or Bridgend are somewhat similar. I just make that observation.
If I could just add on to a little bit of what Andy's mentioned there. I'm really pleased that you picked up a question on data, because it's been a huge volume of activity and work that's gone in this. It's included myself and Andy. We've gone down to speak to colleagues in Public Health Wales. We've relied heavily on colleagues to provide this data, and the actual legislation and requirements now within the Wellbeing and Future Change means that we do need to up the data game right across Wales. And we've had extensive conversations with colleagues in Public Health Wales. They've just introduced now a new public health tool which will help us develop this, but there will be gaps in the data because we either don't collect it now or it's collected on a Gwent footprint, which means that we can't bring it down to the local level. And we've made a conscious choice in Torfaen to get to the lowest level of data we could go to. We've gone to something that's called medium super output areas, which are sub-regions within Torfaen itself. So you have a number of what they call MSOAs across Torfaen. So we're not just looking at Blaenavon, Pontypool and Cwmbran. We're looking at the sub-regions within, or the sub-levels below those regions. And if we can get down to lower levels, which we can only in certain parts of the data sets, we've gone to that level as well.
I just, what's really interesting to me about this is it's a very, very big piece of work because it's a very broad brush, topic. What is well-being, and can we talk all about that in our area, which is a pretty diverse area. Some significant deprivation, deprived communities, and some communities with protected characteristics, some affluent communities, and the whole topic is so big that there has to be some kind of selection in terms of what level of comparative analysis we can actually take each analysis to. Wales is quite a good unit because by and large, on measures of well-being, quite often, we don't compare favourably to the other UK home nations, and so it's a reasonable comparator. Of course, it's the country that we all live in. So it's a very challenging thing to do in any meaningful way. And the most important thing about this for me is how meaningful it all is. So if we're producing this document, which is going to hopefully underpin and inform the way that we plan what our communities need to have better well-being, we do have to get down to more nitty-gritty, but in some areas, with something as broad brush as just well-being, what does well-being look like in Torfaen? Very, very difficult to do. But if you were going to say, Lyndon was talking about gaps in data, if we're talking about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, really big, high on the agenda at the moment within public sector, there's very little data at all about ACEs at any sort of community level, even at a national level. Well, I suppose that's closing the point, really. There are some really important areas which we don't have data on, and the point is learning from this and asking some focused questions for the future, which enables this process to be iterative and ongoing beyond the submission of this.
I mean, yeah, very, very, very quickly, I just wanted to add, very fascinating read what you've got here, but obviously what I found in it really, really quickly was you've got a valley community, you've got an old traditional town, and you've got a new town stroke urban area, which must be problematic for you doing those data sets because it's comparatives across Wales. Now, that's across Wales and how you measure those. I thought I should say, I'm going to ask you a question now because I think Mrs. Chair's indicating he wants me to do. What are the interlinkages with the City Deals scheme? How will the PSB work with City Deals? It's a completely different direction now. Who wants to answer that one?
I'll take that if you don't mind. No, it's absolutely fine. But the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act doesn't make a linkage in with the City Deal. That sits very much outside of what the scrutiny around this piece of work is around. The City Deal isn't referenced in the wellbeing assessment because it's, as John just mentioned, it's a very broad approach to what we try to understand as well-being to the communities in Torfaen as they are now. In just reference to the City Deal, that the PSB hasn't received a paper on the City Deal yet because there are no firm agreements forward, so it would be very difficult to me to make a connection at the moment with the city deal within the wellbeing assessment that we've currently got. But as the city deal develops, then in years to come as part of our iterative process around this, there may well be linkages there, particularly around the economy side of things and around population and so on, around what the city deal can offer. But there's no reference to city deal at this stage. I can't give you an answer on it.
Of the 1,000...
No, hang on a second.
Yeah, there is just a very brief reference to it on page 140, and just sort of, as I say, just it is in there, but at this stage we don't know the detail because obviously it's only just been signed off as well by the leaders.
Of the 1,025 surveys completed, were these representative of the population of Torfaen and the communities where the respondents live? And have we ensured that we are listening to young people to comply with the guidance in accordance with the statutory guidance on children and young people's participation?
Yeah, I'll pick that one up. Yes, our participation officer with children and young people, Rhiannon Bennett, has been out and specifically done work within the schools, within the youth service, through the play service, and obviously that's, you know, her role is to make sure that she follows those guidance. The 1,025 formal responses that we've had back, some of those were from young people that they completed, but Rhiannon has also had some other work that she's done with younger children around pictorial responses, and those are still being analysed, if you like, to see how they can feed in. So the final, you know, we've still got some work trickling in. So in the final consultation, there will probably be a higher number of returns, but not all of those returns are in the questionnaire, formal questionnaire, because there are different ways of including children and young people, and again, some people with disabilities or different characteristics that want to respond in a different way. So that work has been done, and that work needs to be added in to the final.
Come back. So do we have a sort of fair spread that all the communities are represented in that survey? Or are there not more sort of surveys from one community than another? Is there a fair representation?
I think we tried our best to get all communities involved, really. We took things out to public places, so people went out into the various communities. They didn't just stand in the town centres, they actually went into the smaller communities. We used a wide range of people across all the partners to do some of this. So Bronavon went into some of their tenants, so did Melin. The health board were out and about. They did some work in GP practices. They did some work out with some of their patient panels. We had some of our other engagement officers out and about. The police went out and about, talked to some of their customers. We encouraged people through social media to do online. We went to the various forums and different groups as well. So I think within the resources that we have available to us, we did try and reach as many communities as we could, but I think, as with everything, there is always room for improvement. And, you know, if there are ideas about other ways of getting to people or connecting with people, you know, we had the specialist officer with Gypsy Travellers. They did a bit of an exercise with them as well. So we've tried to pick out people that we know have got special contacts where possible, but always up for, you know, any help or advice on more.
Just adding to that on a statistical point of view, and the spread across the borough is very important, as you mentioned, and we're never going to get everybody to complete it. So it's, you know, it's always something that we always struggle with in terms of research and sampling. But in terms of numbers, as a rough guide, we look at getting about 1,050 to be 95% confident that the response is representative of Torfaen as a whole, within, you know, plus or minus 3%. Of whatever response is. So if we had a 70% return, saying that 70% of people were happy with the service, and we got that numbers in, it would be broadly between 73 and 67% of the population. The less that we get, the wider that error margin becomes, and also that starts causing, you know, decisions become, you know, less robust then. But that's as a rough guide. So we're not too far off in terms of numbers, but obviously that does include the whole population, and we need to consider the spread. all the protected rights characteristics, and we never ever get there, but we try to do the best we can to make that as fair as possible.
Okay. I think we just wanted to, as a committee, be reassured that everybody that possibly could be connected with this has been spoken to, and we've taken on board their views. Yeah.
Sue alluded to the fact that she had resources and that she was guided by the fact that maybe if you had slightly more resources, what would you do differently? Or I'm just going to ask a quick question there.
I can't quite say off the top of my head what we do differently, but I think we'd probably sit down and you know, talk to some of our engagement officers and those specialists who are out there, and maybe, you know, see if there are additional ways that we could do something. Well, yeah, and I appreciate that, but yeah, I think, you know, having worked just within the resources that we had, I don't think I could say off the top of my head. What I would say is that if there were more resources, we would discuss the best way forward with those specialists in those engagement areas.
I don't think that's going to actually happen, is it? So I think if you go straight on to Lyndon.
Just very quickly, Dan, and to sum up this area, Chair, this just hasn't been the consultation leading up to the wellbeing assessment. We are still in a consultative process now, and there's a questionnaire that's out. It's on my say. It's been spread quite widely. But in fairness to all the partners that are part of this process, they have committed resources to do some of the consultation with us that led up to the wellbeing assessment being pulled into what is now the formal consultation stage. So, and I always welcome additional resources if members choose to provide some for me.
I think you more or less asked this question, but before I move on to specific areas, can you just confirm that the wellbeing assessment will be kept up to date continuously, or will you just revisit it when you need to?
Well, I'll start this off, and my colleagues may be able to want to put some stuff in. I can't praise my colleagues enough for the amount of volume of the activity that's gone in to produce this, both within our own team, with Rachel's team in communities, and John's assistance as well. Huge amount of work has gone into this. We don't want to be repeating from day one and in the process. So this is iterative. We can't afford for this to be, okay, we've done it now, we'll wait another 5 years and we'll start all over again. The whole purpose of the well-being of future generations is looking at sustainability and being able to change focus as we move along. Andy, of course, is the data manager within the local authority, and we will be charging relevant officers to maintain the levels that we have and update the assessment in order that we don't have to start from a zero-scratch position, and we will be able to report that. And part of your role as scrutiny will be to hold us to account of that, because this process will be a continual scrutiny process. Anybody like to add anything to that?
I am conscious that I want to move us on now to a specific area. So, Colette, if I can ask you to lead on this one.
Generally speaking, and given the link between qualifications and future prospects, should education have been given a greater prominence within the assessment?
Just coming in briefly with that one, I think one of the things that's come across with this whole assessment process and the guidelines is that all areas are supposed to be treated with equal priority, and that makes it very difficult, especially where you consider a lot of funding goes into education and areas like neighbourhood services. But yeah, it has been one that we've struggled with. Rachel might want to add to that or not.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Andy said, but if there's any data sets that you think are particularly relevant that we haven't captured, we'd be very pleased to know about those relating to education.
Issues such as literacy and numeracy are being sort of key problems, really, and they don't feature at all in the assessment.
It's essentially because the data wasn't available. We did actually ask to look for data at the community levels that we were looking to assess, and we just had difficulty finding the data. But we are aware that they are key items, and you know, we will still continue to look for that data and to add that in.
Really looking at standards in our schools, and they are key, obviously, to driving improvement. why haven't we looked at the school's categorisation results in the plan?
I think, we weren't directed by Welsh Government to look at them, I will say. I mean, we looked outside of the statutory data sets that we were supposed to look at to see what was relevant. We did discuss with colleagues internally, including education, any other relevant data sets that would be useful to include that we weren't required to look at, because we were very keen to get a picture that was as complete as possible. And we haven't looked at those, and we can look at those, I guess, during the consultation period. So we'll pick up that conversation with education colleagues.
On section 3, future trends and challenges, one of the big issues being brought forward is the need to focus on our younger children to increase better chance of GCSE results at 15, and obviously partnership working together. This doesn't seem to come through within the assessment.
Again, that's something we can have a look at in more detail during this consultation period. I will say, regarding the future trends, we were hoping that there would be a future trends report available from the Welsh Government to help us, but just because of all the timelines, time pressures and deadlines that they were under, it wasn't available in time for us to use. So we are, I think, Sue, do you want to say a little bit more about that future trends report? You've been involved with discussions, talking to them, haven't you?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Welsh Government were quite ambitious, I suppose, in saying that they would produce a future trends report. They're not quite backtracking, but they are changing how they're viewing that now, I think, and how they're going to put that together. So back in November, Lyndon and I went to a conference, and they're sort of talking about perhaps not producing a report, but producing little sort of bits of information and briefing notes for us along the way, rather than a complete report. But I think, just go back to the points you're raising, Councillor Thomas, I think, we do need to do more work with our education colleagues. We do get some of that, the data that you're referring to, reported in already to the Public Services Board through the current plan, where education is one of the one of the records within the single integrated plan, and I think we just probably do need to take more account of that, and perhaps, as you say, look at the difference in the schools and whatever. But probably we may have relied on education colleagues and the sensitivities around Estyn and where we're at to have fed more into us, and maybe we need to be a bit more conscious about asking them for that, and not just waiting on them to give it to us.
One of your statements on the issues and findings is 6.4.5. People have low levels of qualifications. Directly goes on what Colette was saying here. Low levels of qualifications, low paid jobs, and a greater reliance on benefits than most people in Wales. That rather relates to what she was saying here. How do you jump to that conclusion, following on from what Colette was saying here?
Perhaps I can pick that up, Councillor Ashley, as part of the whole process of doing the wellbeing assessment is broad. Yeah. It's broad in its entirety, and it picks up, as Rachel mentioned earlier, around a common data set that we are using, that's been developed by the Data Unit Wales in conjunction with Welsh Government and ourselves in Gwent. So we are pulling together the data sets. What the executive summary pulls around is what's come from the initial conversations that we've had with members of the public, and what the data is saying, what the school results are saying, what the economic picture is, which pulls together an overview of what 6.4.5 does. What I want everyone to have a view upon is that the wellbeing assessment is the Public Service Board's partnership plan. It isn't just a council response. It isn't just a health board response. It's a raft of different partners' contribution to how we can react to some of these initial priorities or emerging themes that are coming through. We know that certain parts of the borough has economic issues. We know that others have housing issues. So it's that the whole process of this is perhaps not to specifically focus on educational results, but what this plan will look to do in the future is highlight what the priorities, partnerships, all of us together need to work towards to improve the outcomes for individuals. So it wouldn't just be a local authority response to raising education standards. We also got the EAS that are part of that process that are there to drive up school improvement and so on. So it's written in such a way, and the data is collected in such a way that there's going to be a partnership response, not necessarily a local authority response.
I see that as a headline in there, and it linked very much into what Colette was coming back with.
So my last question, there doesn't seem to be any analysis related to school provision and sort of the right type of school in the right place, the demand sort of for Welsh education, sort of church and faith-based schooling, and also, more importantly, children who might have additional needs. So have we done any research or any analysis on that? Or should we be doing some analysis on that?
If I just pick that up, I did have a conversation with one of the officers around 21st century schools. There's a small paragraph in there that they worded. They were very careful how they worded it because of where those proposals are at the moment, and they didn't want to put anything in there that could be causing problems in the future if they stated something that then wasn't accepted through that 21st century schools process. So as I said, I think it is a conversation, and I think that work is happening, but I think it probably wasn't captured clearly enough in this assessment, and that is largely how things are sitting at the moment. But I do take your point that we can go back. I would also say that there is a section on in 2.3.4 in the large technical document around qualifications, and again about employment, etc., which has probably led to that gaps paragraph of pulling together around those different things, why we see people of being low-paid, low-hour jobs because of the qualifications and the aspirations, etc.
Yes, I think there's quite a bit more work to be done on the education side of it. I think we can take that, can we? Yeah, okay.
Can I just add on to the end of that? Something that I think we need to, Linda's probably already stressed, is that this isn't a job just done by the people sat around the table. This is something that we're heavily reliant on other officers and professionals across the organisation and across all the partner organisations. And to be fair, if we don't get the information, it doesn't matter how much we try, we can't make it up. So we appreciate there are gaps, and we know there is other work to be done to be able to gather information. And I appreciate it. It's probably not just education. There are lots of areas that we need to put on, but within the timescales that we've had, the work we've done, it's been quite a considerable struggle, to be honest.
Going to the healthier side of things, which is my area, the report notes various data relating to healthy behaviours. Do we know the interlinkages in Torvine between these behaviours? In other words, are the same people demonstrating all the behaviours? Do you want me to expand on that, or do you understand what I'm saying? Basically, are we finding that the same people who are obese are eating in an unhealthier way, the same people are having a lot of time off school? So in other words, are the same people providing lots of different problems, or are you finding it is dispersed across?
I think that's the absolutely central question to the next stage of this process. We need to be able to look through the analyses that we've got and pick out those groups or areas or communities or people, and likely to be able to go down to a personal level, mind, because the data don't exist, but to be able to pick out those groups or people or areas where there are a collection of well-being issues and where certain solutions might actually impact across a range of well-being goals simultaneously. So I think that's absolutely crucial. So again, it's a massive report. So part of the data that was submitted at a national level, not at a Torvine level, because the data that you're asking for don't exist in terms of individual level data across the different domains of well-being. I'm going as fast as I can. I just got past it. Right. So, in terms of healthy behaviours, I can talk about that bit. And those people who, over the age of 16, who don't drink too much, don't smoke, just a previous conversation for everyone on a webcam. Don't smoke, have a healthy weight, are physically active, and eat 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day. Those people who don't do any of that at all are 3% in the Welsh population. About 3%, it's very small. But there's only about 2% of people with all 5 healthy behaviours, just 2%. Okay, and that goes then, the people with 4 healthy behaviours is 11%. Proportion of the population with just 3 is 30%. 35% just have 2 out of the 5 healthy behaviours. So over a third of our population, 1 in every 3 people, more than 1 in every 3 people, has only 2 out of the 5 healthy behaviours. Now, we know this handful of healthy behaviours underpins diabetes, chronic low back pain, cancer, cardiovascular disease, you know, the premature morbidity and early death. And we've got over a third just having 2 of the healthy behaviours.
I think what we wanted to bring out was, when we were discussing this earlier, or a couple of days ago, we all said it's so easy to say that all the unhealthy people live in one area. That's not the case. I mean, in my ward, I'm a school governor, I notice fat children going into my school, and it's the same. So as long as we are aware of that.
Just ask one very quick question. One question I didn't have answered there. There are things called environmental factors. Are there any environmental factors like pollution, like clusters of other things that might, because you know this data better than anybody else, and some other people might, that in this area that might be bringing this in? I mean, there are instances elsewhere where we live in a coastal area or up a mountain or stuff like that. Actually, is there any other factors other than the inactivity or a lifestyle that's doing this?
Which cause chronic disease, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, lots.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are genetic factors. There are, you know, education plays a part. Yeah, lots of factors play a part in disease. I'm just saying, in terms of health behaviour, which was a question that I think I was asked, you know, what is the overlap? Well, there's significant overlap.
Okay, moving on then. The demographic doesn't include anything on family size. No. We know when we're looking at children becoming looked after children, I happen to chair that panel. We know that what commonly happens, you don't normally have just one child go in. If it's a family with 5 children, all 5 go into it. So do we need to look at family size?
So this would probably more likely be a question about social health and social care. So I'm not an expert on social care. That I am aware that was an issue that was brought out in one of the truthing sessions that was organised about a particular family where one child had just gone into care, and they were expecting that there were another 6 children, I think. So
we're not sure, but that may be picked up through the Population Needs Assessment, which is the other piece of work that's been done under the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. They're currently out for consultation as well. I will have another look through their draft, and if they're not capturing it, then we'll see where it's best to capture that information in.
Because I think where we were looking at, we go back to the healthy living and so forth. If you've got one child in a family, the chances are all the children in the family are unhealthy. Sorry, Lyndon, did you want to come in now?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the back of what John and Sue has mentioned there, really. Some of the instances you've mentioned there, particularly around lack, if we take just lack as an example. My colleague David Congreve and Duncan Forbes are leading a strategy called Don't Walk By, which is, again, elements of what feeds into this overall, or will decide really what the well-being objectives will be going forward, and that's all about the earlier intervention and prevention activities that public bodies, and I keep going back to public bodies because it's not John's responsibility or the council's responsibility, you as members, it's all public services, but it's also the responsibility of the Torvine community to be engaging along more healthier behaviours and so on. So in relation to just linking this back into the work that David and Duncan has done around the early intervention and prevention, that may well come through part of the consultation events that we're having, some of the thoughts of PSB members around prioritising work programme to have that earlier intervening activity which will reduce demand in the longer term but provide the suitable support in the beginning, and that may well impact on those large families you talked about, Councillor Mills.
Just to come in on that, actually, there's a programme which is funded through the neighbourhood care networks and jointly by local government called the Social Prescribing Programme, which is about the recognition that when people seek help, in this case to the NHS in primary care, that actually it might not often be a medical problem that's underlying. It might be a social problem, one of a number of problems, and that poor health and these factors of poor well-being coexist, particularly in more deprived communities. And so I think it's an emerging, I just want to quickly say, it's an emerging way of working for Torvine. The team around the family, the prevention and early intervention strategy, social prescribing, the way that we're working in antenatal services, all very similar, and recognising that actually it's not about programmes and projects, it's more about practice. So that all of the different organisations around the table need to change practice a little bit towards our priorities, rather than trying to build a project or a programme that's going to last as long as the funding.
Before I move off, because you've actually linked me nicely into another question I was going to say, have we actually looked at role models? Because if you've got a child that's born into a family that have never worked, eat very unhealthily, don't exercise and so forth, have we actually looked into how the role model family element causes more?
So I think role modelling is one aspect of society that sets a pattern for future generations' behaviour. We could be talking about role models in schools, role models in local government, role models in the police service, role models across public sector. You know, role models in the family and as parents, of course, are important in that, but they're one part of that, and role modelling itself is one part of, you know, what some of the things that we probably need to look at. I mean, you know, and not just in health. We're talking about recycling behaviour, volunteering, mobilising assets in communities. You know, that whole you know, gambit of behaviour. So, yeah, it's part of it.
Okay, thank you. Move on. With the data, we all accept that as people live longer, they need more interventions on health and social care, etc. But do we actually have the data to prove that?
we all glance towards data,
I mean, there's two aspects to this, really. I mean, one of the things to mention is that we do have data from Welsh Government around projections of population, and as we're all well aware, you know, people are living older, medical enhancement is getting better, so there's going to be a point sometime in the future where the crisis is going to be a breaking point, I'm sure. John is well aware that's where it's heading. The problem we've got is that in terms of, we're fairly confident about the population levels are going to be increasing, even though we're given numbers heading 25 years ahead, but that'll change every time they redo the figures. They'll have new figures to suggest they'll be up, down, and so on, but still heading in that direction. I think that the health side of it is, you know, in terms of knowing what the health data is moving forward, that'll be John's expertise, but you know, that's the one over that longer period of time we haven't really got the data on, even though there is evidence to show what's going on, you know, over the longer period.
So the short answer is no.
Well, we have, but you know, in terms of the population numbers, and there is data around what happens to particular people if they're living older, and the particular issues around dementia, and more people getting dementia, and if we're going to have more of them, there's going to be more people who are going to need services. So it's as simple as that. But John might want to.
No. Yeah, it was just a conversation we had. If people are living, say, 10 years longer than at a point in previous time, is that 10 years of unhealthy life where they need support, but we're just getting better at, I don't know, stopping people from dying? Or is it 10 years more of healthy life before they need support? Or is it, at what point is it in between those two positions?
I think that's probably, again, what John will probably add into that, but it's a bit of all of that, I think. And, you know, the bit, I'm not stealing John's thunder because he's the expert, but in terms of people living longer, yeah, you know, just because people are alive, they haven't necessarily got quality of life, and are living with long-term conditions, which may be causing them, you know, considerable problems. And in an ideal world, you'd want them to have 10 years longer, where they're living 10 years healthy longer. But you know, that's the constant problem. But
I think the concerns we were having, and why we would want data on this, is every time you look at the news or you read a newspaper, you hear how we can't cope with what we've got at the moment. So how are we going to cope in the future?
Well, so no, I think this is probably one of the central issues for this piece of work, really. So there's you know, the projections are quite stark. Clearly, services are at capacity, and it's not, you can't think about health on its own. This is health and social care, the wider community services that support people and keep people independent and well. So clearly they're, you know, very stretched, and we know the projection is for, you know, over 85s and over 75s in the population to increase significantly over the next 20, 30 years. There are a number of things that we could probably focus on as a partnership, which could probably ameliorate and support that. And one of those could be about thinking about our older population as actually an asset, because there are a lot of people who are growing old healthily. Healthy life expectancy is increasing alongside life expectancy, so the number of years a person can expect to live in good health, free from disease, is increasing. But there are massive disparities between most deprived communities and least deprived communities. There's somewhere in the region of a 15-year gap, more than a 15-year gap, between the most deprived 20%, not the most deprived street or family, but the fifth of the population that are most deprived compared to the fifth that are most affluent. There's a 15-year gap in healthy life expectancy. So if we're, you know, to manage this situation into the future, we have to think about health and care services in a broader sense. We have to think about preventative action to ameliorate against some of those significant issues like dementia and premature morbidity. I think as a partnership there's probably an opportunity to do some of that if we had some more focused thinking around it. But there has been a lot of work with the frailty service and the work that's done between health and social services within the community, and of course the neighbourhood care networks that pick up this agenda also.
Before I just move on to another area, mental health is huge at the moment. We're all talking about it. Have we looked at what could be the problems causing mental health issues in Torvine?
So I'm not really an expert on mental health issues. There's a section in the needs assessment on that. I'm sure it is one of those things that's important and will be looked at as part of the response analysis, I'm sure.
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, I'm very aware of, because I'm in the situation myself personally, the dichotomy between healthy and unhealthy. I mean, carers, people with autism, mental ill people. We see it all the time as counsellors, and some of us personally go through all that with people with, as you just said, Alzheimer's, etc. The dichotomy between having to do all that and the healthy living is you know, the focus on how we deal with that in society now, and how much resources and how much resources the family is having to cope with as well, and that business in here about wealth, not wealth, putting resources into it. I mean, where do you go with all that?
Yeah, I think
we've actually answered that. Sorry, Lynn, did you want to come in before? I've got one more question on health.
Very, very quickly on this, Chair, just to say that some of the discussions that you quite rightly bringing forward this morning on questioning, the colleagues in social care are also doing a population needs assessment as part of their legislation, where a number of these issues will be picked up. But I just want to give assurances to scrutiny that we haven't done this in isolation of that process as well. Okay.
Just my last question, and again, it's on data. You'll be pleased to know. Do we have any data on response times for ambulance responses, and can we collate that with the impact on health?
Yeah. I don't have those data. I don't think we've supplied those data to the needs assessment, so I don't think it's there at the moment. If that's something that the scrutiny want me to take back to the NHS.
I think we do, because a while ago we did scrutinise ambulance response times in Torvine, and we did come up with a number of recommendations. And so we would like to know whether the response times for Torvine is still as bad as it was, or has it improved? Stuart, can I ask you to lead on safer, because Mike's not here?
Okay, happy to. Crime statistics tend to change very frequently. Are we confident that each year-on-year analysis of Torvine becoming a safer place to live is accurate? Sorry.
The data sources that we get, Councillor Ashley, around some of the crime and disorder come directly from Gwent Police and the Police Crime Commissioner's Office. We've also got now an established Safer Gwent committee, for the want of a better word, which looks at the different ranges across crime and disorder, not just in Torvine, but across Gwent. So I think in relay, and incidentally, Torvine chairs that group with Kate Williams, which means that we get first-hand information as well as other colleagues doing that. The data and information we have, we're confident from the areas to which it's supplied.
Sorry, Stuart, if I can come in. I think where we had a concern is we as councillors have regular meetings with Inspector Morgan and so forth, and one thing he does emphasise practically at each meeting is that the way they record crime is changing literally week by week. So therefore, how can we look at the statistics to prove whether Torvine is safer than it used to be or is getting worse when we're not comparing apples and all the rest of it? That was our main concern.
I was going to say, yes, I would agree with that. I think Andy and I, Andy in particular, put a lot of effort in working with police colleagues to try and make sure that the data we've used was as robust as possible, and that was without having the benefit of seeing the new Safer Gwent strategy, which has subsequently come out. So one of our jobs now during this consultation period is to digest the information in there and make sure that we've captured everything that's come out of that as being important.
One of the comments I will make.
Sorry,
yeah.
I was just going to say that Superintendent Nick McLean sent his apologies this morning. He was on the list to come, and I think they are very aware that, you know, as you say, the way they're reporting things change, and that he has already made some comments to us about what we have in the assessment. Although we've worked closely with them, they're already saying, you know, we need to change this. So I think even when we get the latest data, there will be difficulties because, as you say, ongoing reporting will change, and that's partly why we're saying this can't be a process that's done in 5-year chunks. Every time information comes out and new data is available, then I think it's going to be down to Andy and his colleagues in the data sets across the partnerships to update us, and then we're going to have to look at the narrative and report back into the PSB where things have changed and work with those professionals in those areas. And I think crime and safety is one of those key ones because there are such frequent changes. So just wanted to reassure you on that point.
As part of going through the process, really, and it's one of those things when you're dealing with data that doesn't belong to you. You know, I've picked up in where there has been sudden steps and changes in data from that's come across, and I've scrutinised that, and some of it has been about recategorising of data, which isn't obvious. But, you know, so we're doing that process ourselves, because if there is a step in data, it needs to be explained why that is, not just, you know, it's gone up or it's gone down. If it's gone down because of intervention, fine, say it. If it's gone down because those particular crimes have been recategorised elsewhere, then it just needs to be mentioned. So it's parts like that, really, that needs to be explained. And another thing worth mentioning is that the Gwent strategic assessment, for the Safer Gwent one, tends to be a year-on-year process, whereas, you know, I've fed back to them that really we need to be looking at, you know, like a 5-year trend, really, of data, but they tend to look at you know, 1 year and 1 year all the time, and I think they've kind of take that back and consider that for the future.
I would make one quick observation, if I may, Chair, before I go on to the next bit of it. Having sat on the Cwmbran Community Council for 23 years, I looked at it the other day and realised the way in which data is fed back, even from your committee, in terms, it's wonderful stuff, and we all enjoy it as members, but over the years, and the police is a really good example, it's changed quite dramatically, which I think is the point Ray was making, and how it's presented for various audiences, I think you were acutely aware of what you just said there. And the police statistics is a classic one, because members particularly like that presenting, and that whole issue about difference data between different organisations, I think you're all aware of that. That's something that's come out over the years. Thank you for that. Okay, question number 2. Where are we? Sorry, I'm gone out of sequence here. Safer Gwent analysis and LDP are being updated for release in early 2017. Will this be done in time to feed into this document?
I think we can safely say, Chair, that the Safer Gwent elements and any other documentation that comes to our attention during the consultation stage, whilst we're setting the wellbeing objectives, will be taken into account.
Did you mention the LDP as well, then?
Yeah.
We work very closely with colleagues in forward planning, and I think, you know, part of this sort of process has been, you know, making sure that we're not duplicating activities. So, you know, where we've looked at certain data sets, you know, they'll be able to kind of use that information. And similarly, you know, we'll be talking to them as they're going through their process to see if there's anything we need to pick up and reflect in this kind of live document going forward. So, yeah.
Okay, next section, which is the last one. In conducting the wellbeing assessment, how have we focused on the needs of people with protected characteristics?
So, we've certainly, our division has the equalities brief within, and we've liaised extensively with colleagues in equalities to make sure that we're covering off the areas that we need to cover off legitimately across the consultation process. So, Sue mentioned earlier on the fact that we've done specific consultation with the Gypsy Traveller. So there are elements within the protected characteristics that we are covering across, and we've also got, of course, the community cohesion sitting within our division as well, and they're part of this iterative process as we're moving forward during consultation as well.
So you're going to cross-cut all that as well to check that you're okay?
As Sue mentioned earlier, we have probably been, and I'm going to sing the praises of my colleagues because they've done a fabulous job, have probably consulted with the widest range of stakeholders across the borough than other areas that I looked up on the internet. You know, we've had 1,025 responses, which is very high for this area, and probably higher than even some cities may get. So I'm fairly confident in the the breadth of consultation to be taken through. And I'm not taking any credit for that because I didn't do it. My colleagues have done it, but they've done a fantastic job of involving as many people as they can.
It was similar to the first question around the national indicators. When we looked at what we should or could include within the assessment and what's in the guidance, it did mention that people possessing a protected characteristic, and it didn't say you have to, it said you may include. So it wasn't necessarily around consulting with them, but actually perhaps including some data about them and needs, which didn't necessarily come through in the report.
Just want to say really is that is one of the hardest areas to get data on, in essence.
I do think if we are serious about improving equality, and if we are wanting to improve access equity to the services that we provide and better opportunities for populations with protected characteristics that might be experiencing inequalities currently, then that really is something that needs to be taken forward as an exercise of gathering information about what that looks like within these different communities, not just geographically, of course, as part of the ongoing process of assessment and response. But I don't think we should forget that in this big thing, it possibly could have featured more. And I think that actually it should be one of the features that gets taken forward in this ongoing kind of well-being assessment. I think it should be.
Okay. Everybody happy on the safer? I'll hand over then to Mandy if you take us through the cleaner side of things.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Right, okay, the first one, looking at natural resources, forests, woods and trees. This section of the assessment states that the risks to woodland include lack of management and successional planting. When preparing the statement, did you liaise with neighbourhood services at all in relation to the recent tree survey that was carried out?
Yes, we did, yeah. So Steve Williams and Andrew Osborne and the wider countryside team, we consulted with quite a lot. So in fact, they gave good contributions to the assessment. So thanks to them. Yeah.
So you would have discussed the volunteer groups as well working. Would that have all been put in?
Yes, yeah. And I think during the process when we were drafting that section, the text was going backwards and forwards between the two teams. So yeah, we have worked extensively to kind of pull this together, and we're continuing to work with them now during the consultation period as well to plug some of the gaps that there are, because we know that there are still some gaps around the environmental data. So yeah.
Thank you. And I know that Stuart likes this one, but I'm going to ask it. Do you think we should look to include the data on the standard of an accessibility of cycle paths?
I think there's a little bit of data around cycle paths in there. I can't remember which section it is. It might even be in the health section. So I did talk to the Rights of Way officers around cycle paths, but it is a really important issue. So if it's not jumping out clearly, I'll certainly have a look at that again.
If you want detailed information on that, I can give it to you.
Yes.
Sorry. It's simple. It was business about. We've got an extensive network, but some of it is not up to current standards. It's stuff like that. And it's also about usage, because it jumps right in, because some of the health authorities are actually getting involved in cycle paths quite heavily, and it's about usage and promotion as well. But the actual where they go and what they do as well, the active travel stuff, which I know you're quite involved with.
Sorry, just to jump in, I think it was also about
Go on.
the where it actually covers, how much of the borough is actually covered by cycleways and so forth.
We actually, I think someone in Andy's team, one of the GIS officers, mapped community assets for us, and that included cycle paths and the extent and, how communities were linked to them, how close they were to them. So we have got that data, but, I'm happy to sort of look at it again and make sure that it's jumping out really clearly there.
I think, I've got a sort of one or two users of the cycle network in my team, and they're happy with the coverage, but perhaps not the quality. And it's all very well saying we cover a certain proportion of the borough, but what is actually usable and whether data on that can be included.
Well, just on that, I think active travel and the opportunity for people in communities to be able to walk and cycle instead of taking motorised transport for short journeys it might not be as high a priority in terms of importance as sustainability of health and care services as the demography changes, right? But it is one of those issues that cuts across a lot of the well-being goals. So it's good for the environment, good for carbon reduction, less traffic outside schools, less antisocial behaviour, less air pollution, and reduction in childhood obesity, increase in population, physical activity, more confidence, interconnectedness of communities, better economy. You know, it's really important. So it isn't, you know, that on its own that changes everything. It's not a game changer on its own, but it's one of those things that actually cuts right across and requires the 5 ways of working cited in the Act for us to all get together around. So I think from that perspective it is really important. And actually, just lastly on that, the National Institute for Clinical, I want to say excellence, but they changed it. It was National, nice. National Institute for Care and, yeah. They have published guidelines on you know, what makes active travel much easier to be used.
I think we were looking at things like encouraging walking children to school instead of taking them by bus or car and that sort of thing. Sorry, Mandy, I'll hand back to you now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, go on to the next one, which is waste and cleanliness. The assessment makes reference specifically to the success in the percentage of municipal waste sent for reuse, recycling or composting as a result of initiatives introduced by the Council. Although recycling continues to increase, the percentage of food waste recycled is rising at a much slower pace. Is this something that should be referred to in more detail in the assessment so that ways of increasing it could be considered going forward?
I think, well, I did consult with Cunningham and Edwards, the waste team, around the data that we included in the assessment, and it's kind of that balance that Lyndon goes back to sort of saying it's not a council document, it's a document, you know, for the whole of the public sector to use, a sort of snapshot of well-being. But, you know, there are particular issues around food waste. I think later on in the assessment around future trends, we're talking about finite resources of the earth and, you know, the fact that we need to get more towards one planet living. You know, so we have kind of reflected the fact that, you know, it's really important. But if you think that we need to kind of emphasise food waste in particular, we can add some data in about that if it's available. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think it'd be important. In Appendix 1 of the assessment, all 3 principal settlements make reference to littering as something not good about their community. They've all got an issue with litter. The assessment itself makes very little reference to cleanliness. So now that the street scene has moved into the new area model working approach, and evidence is coming through of improved cleanliness throughout the authority and community, is it worth expanding this section to explain what has been done to deal with the issue across Borough? I know it's in the early stages, the new street scene model, but going forward.
Yeah, I think the data that we used on littering came from Data Unit Wales, didn't it? So it was part of National Assembly data sets that we were sort of directed to use. But I take on board your point, and we can kind of do a little bit more explaining around, you know, what we're doing to kind of reduce litter. Because
I think we as councillors, and whenever I take my dog for a walk, I can guarantee I will be stopped and people say, have you seen that litter there? Have you seen the dog mess? And we all agree that it's a huge problem. But the residents always say to us, what is the council doing about it? And I think we need to sort of emphasise. I mean, my answer is, well, you live in the area. The people who live in the area drop the litter. They don't pick up after the dog. So it's your fault, not ours. But they just want reassurance that we as a council do take it very seriously. And I can say, when I go to different parts of the country, I get exactly the same thing. So it's not a Torvine problem. It's not a Wales problem. It's a national problem.
And working, just jump in and working, I mean, as councillors, we've all worked towards getting this area model working, because we've all identified that it is a problem in the community. And I think it is, in the short time, we are seeing an improvement. So I think it'd be really important taking it forward to get those figures from street scene.
I'll add a very quick bit. The other thing about your partnership board is that you all own assets, you know, a police, the health authority, etc. You've all got the same problem. And, you know, the litter, the recycling, etc., all on your premises. So it's a really nice one to bring in as well, because I think there's a lot of virtue in all this as well, which is I think, the other issue in this one.
Thank you, Chair. Just to really pick up on the comment you finished on, both yourselves and Councillor Owen there, around the fact that although this is a partnership plan around public authorities, there is an emphasis on the public contributing to their own well-being, one of which is collecting litter and living in the environment. If they're unhappy in the environment, that leads to depression and so on and so forth. It's just one element. So I think there's no one-size-fits-all in this process, but there is that, you know, if more emphasis needs to go into the plan around the issues around littering and so on, there has to be the reflection then of what the community need to impact upon as well.
And it's wider than just picking the litter up as well in terms of partners. You know, but it's also the future generations and the education of those children being brought up that littering isn't a good thing. It's not cool to drop litter by the side of a bin because they can. You know, there's a much wider aspect.
So that's one element, the role modelling of behaviour, and it just strikes me that throughout public services now and into the future of public services, with the finances and the decreasing kind of financial outlook that we have, we are going to be more and more needing to work with the community on co-producing some of the solutions that we've got, that we're talking about right now and that we've talked about earlier on. And I just wonder where is the kind of public service expertise on behaviour change, behavioural economics, whether it's recycling, whether it's littering, whether it's health behaviour, whether it's social behaviour, whatever that is. I just wonder, you know, where, and if that is something, if we're talking about behaviour as one of those emerging things, where is that critical mass of expertise and knowledge about changing that? Because it isn't, role modelling is one, it's easy for all of us, you know, we read a paper and we go, it's education, schools, well, they've got numeracy and literacy, ask the GPs, well, sustainability of primary care is a significant issue that needs to be dealt with, you know, as soon as possible. But there's the human behaviour thing, it doesn't really sit anyway, and yet it's a huge side of public service and well-being.
Just to wrap this up then, before we go, I think what we wanted to emphasise and something put in here, that it is not, you know, we hear so many times from the residents, oh, it's the council's responsibility. It is not. It is all our responsibilities, and I think that's what we wanted to emphasise. Okay, I just want to move on.
There's one quick issue that I come in, because you're public service bodies, I just noticed this. You said about two factors. One thing is an organisation called Sustain Wales, which I think you know about, which do bring public bodies and firms together. That might be one element of that. The other aspect, which I've just noted because I'm not got anything as resources chair, but there is something you're missing in here. It's called procurement, which you'll do. And in fact, as public bodies, the business about sustaining, procuring sustainability, which we did do a scrutiny on. And it strikes me as a joint exercise. You could look at that.
That's an excellent point, actually, because one of the things that we picked up in the economy section was around the number of people that are employed in the public sector and the influence of the public sector in Torfaen, and the need for kind of more kind of foundational economy type approaches. So yeah, I think moving forward into the planning phase, you know, that could be something that the PSB may want to consider. So it is useful that you flagged it.
Where it does come in here, because of your practices, the environmental stuff, a whole lot of issues involved. I've brought it in here because it's just struck me where you've got the public involved and where you've got your own employees, which are the public round here. You can change practices in health and well-being. Very much so.
Okay, right. glad to hear this is the last one. So, looking at flooding and climate change, one of the gaps acknowledged in the assessment is that the report contains information about fluvial river flooding, but not surface water flooding. In May 14, 198 properties in Torfaen were flooded. 108 of those were from culvert overloads due to extreme weather conditions. And the assessment states that there is an anticipation of greater frequency of extreme weather conditions. Sorry, yeah, extremely. Have you considered those?
Yes, I think it was just, I'll sort of hold my hand up here, I think it was a case of deadline approaching and we just didn't get it in time. So we are working closely with Mark Strickland. In fact, I spoke to him yesterday around getting that data in, because I think it's really important to have the surface water risk of flooding in there. Yeah.
Good. And the last one is in March 15, Cleaner Overview and Scrutiny Committee made a recommendation that Torfaen pursue the issue relating to SUDS, the Sustainability Urban Drainage Systems, as part of a Welsh Government consultation with the aim of the implementation of a statutory process for the approval and adoption of SUDS. Welsh Government published the outcome in January 16 with the aim of reviewing the options, including the implementation of Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act 2010 over the next 12 months, with a view to consultation on the options later in 16. Has this been considered as part of the assessment as well?
Sustainable urban drainage is mentioned in the assessment. I'm not sure we've captured the detail of what you've just mentioned there, but the kind of the bit where we discuss it, we had input in from the landscape team and also forward planning and the drainage team. So I shall make sure that we've captured that, because I think it's mentioned in a couple of places, in the climate change section and in the flooding section. But yes, we do note the importance of sustainable urban drainage in there.
Good, thank you. That's it then.
Before I wrap things up, Colette, can I ask you if you have anything else you wish to ask or bring out?
Thanks, Chair.
You're happy, Mandy?
No, I'm happy.
You're happy. Stuart, do you have anything? You must have. Stuart?
No, I'm not. No, I'm just surprised you.
Thank you.
Other
Okay.
than that bit about procurement, which I suddenly came up with. Sorry about that.
Just before I move on to the next part of the meeting, can I just say to everybody, thank you so much for your contribution. You've given us a huge amount of information. And I think as far as I'm concerned, that what comes across is that this is not just Torfaen County Borough Council or the Health Authority, it's everybody. But most importantly, it includes the residents, because they do have a huge part to play in this. We must get away from this sort of way of thinking, oh, that's the Health Authority's responsibility, that's the council. It's all of our responsibilities, and with austerity and everything else, we must make sure that we all look at it that way, because I think that's hugely important. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything. Lyndon?
Thank you very much, Chair. It's just really to thank the committee this morning to give us the opportunity to come and have a conversation here. I think we've picked up some really good, valued input from this, and it's and the question was very tough. Perhaps if I could just explain to you what the next steps are as a committee, really. Torfaen as an authority also chair the Gwent Strategic Wellbeing Assessment Group, which is a group of partnership officers. A number of my colleagues here sit on that group across Gwent. So what we're trying to do, as well as having a Torfaen Wellbeing Assessment, we're trying to link in with what a Gwent Wellbeing Assessment would look like as well, in order that if there are particular impacts across different areas, that we could take perhaps a wider than Torfaen approach to tackling those issues on that wider footprint, which avoids the duplication that my colleagues in public health have to deal with around some of the areas to which the assessment will allude to. We're going through formal consultation at the moment. This will feed into that formal consultation process. We will be taking a report to the Public Service Board on the 16th of March, following a meeting of all the partnership of February, skipped a month there, around what the emerging priorities, and that isn't a decision making, that's saying to the Public Service Board, from the assessment that we've done, these are the emerging priorities. This is the feedback that we're currently getting, which will help us feed into then a final wellbeing objectives that lead into the March meeting. So we're very much still in the consultation, but we're welcoming any feedback into this, which does help us. Really pleased to note, Chair, that you mentioned the fact that this is a partnership plan. But what we have to be very careful when we're moving through to the objectives, to the actions we do, is that we tackle those on a partnership basis, and it doesn't end up being one organisation tackling one or another. It has to be joined up. But importantly, picking up on some of the issues you raised and my colleagues raised around the finite resources that we will all have, we need to prioritise what those activities are. So we're not going to be able to tackle everything that comes along. That's been a fault of perhaps some of the activities we tried to do in the past, which is an answer to everything for everybody. We have to be quite clear in, well, what matters to Blaenavon, what matters to Pontypool, what matters to Cwmbran, and tackle those issues on those bases, based on the priorities we need to do, while still thinking of that regional approach. So there are some very difficult decisions to be made, and there are some resources that, as partners, we'll need to utilise when we get to the final wellbeing plan of what we are going to be concentrating on. But at every stage of that action, we will be involved in scrutiny, because that is a critical role in this process. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. What will happen now, we will discuss the meeting this morning. We will come up with a number of recommendations, and these will come through to you in the normal fashion. But can I once again say thank you to everybody for your contribution this morning. Thanks.
Okay.
Sorry, what we need to do now is to come up with the recommendations, but what I suggest is what I've done in the past is we'll go through them now, but over the next couple of days, if any of us think of anything that's not there, we will contact Tom to make sure that those recommendations are actually included. So Tom, do you want to go through the ones you've actually picked up so far?
Yeah, I think from the off there was a potential issue around not including the national indicators. I think it was picked up straight away, and also whether we needed to include some information around the protected characteristics. So that seemed to be two potential issues with the assessment. But then there were more specific issues then around. I think Councillor Thomas picked up that the education data needed to be enhanced. Issues around literacy and numeracy didn't seem to be addressed, and whether we needed to include data around the standards of our schools at the moment. There was demographic data we felt needed to be included, particularly around family size. Yeah. We perhaps could include data around not just mental health issues, but causes of mental health issues, which would be critical in us developing strategies for improving the situation. We need to know the actual causes of problems. Members felt they needed to have data around ambulance response times included within the assessment. There was also information around active travel, particularly around the quality of cycleways. I don't even know if that's available, but it could well be identified as a data gap.
It's not just quality; it's also where they go.
Yeah. It was quality and
linkage is the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps the data around recycling needed to be to dig a bit deeper around, particularly around food waste, because that seems to be a particular issue in Torvine that the Cleaner Communities Scrutiny Committee has picked up on before. What else did I have? I've written area-based. What was that?
Area-based streets.
Oh yeah, sorry. The needed to include some information around what the emerging area-based working has already developed and what it might develop. There was a further. Well, I think Rachel Shaughnessy said they plan to include information around surface water flooding, but had been curtailed by time. So it's kind of a recommendation, but we know they're already working on it. And then, Councillor Ashley, you raised something about sustainable procurement.
It's strategically, it's community focused. I'm trying to think of the right word for it. It's local public bodies using their procurement in favour of the community. It's something we actually did scrutiny. They could do it really, really well, because they've got the clout to do it. They've got the clout to do it, and it's encouraging local firms. It's encouraging joint working co-ops a lot. You know, it's really brilliant.
Can I just mention Section 3, future trends and challenges, and obviously one of the big issues about the focus on younger children.
I think we covered a hell of a lot of it actually there.
Mandy, you're happy?
Yeah, I'm happy.
And I think I'm more or less happy. So what we'll do, I'll ask Tom to send out the draft recommendations to us with a couple of days for that. We can read through them, and if we want to add anything, we can email it back to Tom. Okay, is everybody happy with that? Can I just then, before we close the meeting, Tom, did you want to say anything more?
Just that from the guidance, I note that we need to send these recommendations to Future Generations Commissioner, to the Wales Audit Office, and to Welsh Government. So I'm not sure whether they go out now or whether they go out once we've had the response, but I'll check that.
Okay. Other than that, for me to thank everybody for your contribution and your hard work this morning, and to thank Tom for his and his team's hard work. Can you pass on our thanks to everybody within your team, and to close the meeting at 11:30?